The violent crack of thunder sent Theodora Wade clutching her two small children tighter beneath the leaking canvas of their covered wagon. Wyoming Territory, 1876, was no place for a widow with two young ones, especially during a storm that seemed determined to wash away what little they had left. "Mama, I'm scared," whispered 5-year-old Josiah, his small body trembling against hers. "Hush now," Theodora soothed, though her own heart pounded with fear. 3-year-old Susanna had finally fallen asleep despite the downpour that hammered their wagon like angry fists. The broken axle that had stranded them 10 miles from the nearest town now seemed like a death sentence as night fell. A bolt of lightning illuminated the sodden prairie around them, revealing a dark silhouette approaching on horseback. Theodora reached for the old revolver her late husband had left her, hands shaking as she aimed it toward the wagon opening. "Hello, the wagon," a deep voice called over the storm. "Anyone alive in there? Stay back," Theodora shouted, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I'm armed." The figure dismounted, approaching slowly with hands raised. "Madam, I mean no harm. Name's Kieran Blackwood. I was heading to Silver Creek when I spotted your wagon. Thought you might need assistance." Another flash of lightning revealed a tall man in a rain-slicked duster, the brim of his hat shielding eyes that seemed to assess her situation quickly. Water cascaded off his broad shoulders as he waited for her response. "Our axle broke," Theodora admitted, lowering the gun slightly. "My children and I have been stranded since midday. May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the damaged wheel barely visible in the gloom. With a reluctant nod, Theodora watched as he examined the wagon, his movements efficient despite the driving rain. Josiah peered curiously from behind her skirts. "It's bad, madam," Kieran announced, returning to the wagon opening. "Storm's getting worse, too. My cabin's about 3 miles east. I can take you and your little ones there until morning." "I don't know you, sir," Theodora replied, tightening her grip on the pistol. A smile crossed his weather-worn face. "That's fair enough, but this wagon won't keep you dry much longer, and these plains aren't forgiving, especially to children." As if to emphasize his point, a gust of wind tore loose one corner of the canvas, sending a spray of rainwater over Susanna, who woke with a startled cry. "I give you my word as a man of the territory," Kieran continued. "You'll be safe with me tonight, and I'll help fix your wagon come morning." Theodora looked at her crying daughter, her frightened son, and the worsening storm. Pride was a luxury she could ill afford. "Very well, Mr. Blackwood," she conceded. "We accept your help." Within minutes, Kieran had fashioned a makeshift sling from his own coat to carry Susanna against his chest. He helped Theodora mount his horse with Josiah in her arms, then took the reins and led them through the darkness, a lantern swinging from his free hand to light their way. The journey seemed endless, but Kieran's steady presence never faltered. He spoke little, focusing instead on guiding them safely through the treacherous terrain. When Josiah began to whimper from cold, Kieran removed his own scarf and wrapped it around the boy. "Almost there," he assured them as a small cabin came into view, a faint light glowing from its single window. The cabin was modest but sturdy, with a stone fireplace that Kieran immediately set about stoking to life. He moved with the easy efficiency of a man accustomed to providing for himself, setting water to boil and laying out blankets near the growing flames. "You folks hungry?" he asked, hanging his dripping hat on a peg by the door. "We couldn't impose further," Theodora began, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. Kieran's laugh was warm and genuine. "No imposition, madam. Been a while since I had company. Might do me good to remember my manners." As he prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, Theodora observed him surreptitiously. His hands were calloused but gentle as he attended to their needs. The cabin, though sparse, was clean and orderly. A few books lined a small shelf, surprising her with their scholarly titles. "You're educated," she remarked without thinking. "West Point," he replied without elaboration, setting plates before them. "Your little ones have good appetites." Indeed, both children were devouring their food with enthusiasm. Susanna had overcome her initial shyness and now watched Kieran with open fascination. "They've had a difficult journey," Theodora explained. "We're from Ohio originally. My husband Thomas passed 6 months ago from consumption. We're heading to my cousin's ranch near Silver Creek. I'm sorry for your loss, Kieran said, his voice softening. Silver Creek's a good town, growing fast since the silver strike last year. And you, Mr. Blackwood, what brings a West Point man to this wilderness? Something flickered across his face, pain perhaps, or regret. The war left many of us looking for quiet places, madam. The subject closed, he turned his attention to Josiah, who was eagerly showing him a wooden soldier Thomas had carved. Kieran admired it appropriately, then produced a small piece of wood and his knife, beginning to whittle as the boy watched in wonder. After the meal, despite Theodora's protests, Kieran insisted she and the children take his bed while he slept by the fire. As she tucked her exhausted children beneath the clean quilts, Theodora felt a confusing mixture of gratitude and wariness. Good men were scarce on the frontier, and experience had taught her to be cautious of unexpected kindness. Yet as rain continued to lash against the cabin walls, she found herself thankful for the solid roof over their heads and the quiet strength of the man who had provided it. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Theodora awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Josiah's delighted laughter. She found her son outside, helping Kieran load tools into a cart hitched to a sturdy mule. "Good morning, Mrs. Wade," Kieran greeted her, tipping his hat. "Thought we'd head out and fix that axle of yours once you've had some breakfast. Your boy here has been telling me all about the adventures you've had." "I hope he hasn't been a bother," Theodora said, noting her son's obvious admiration for their host. "Not at all. It's nice having youngsters around." Something in his tone suggested a deeper meaning, but he turned away before she could analyze it further. After a breakfast of johnnycakes and more of the strong coffee, they set out for the stranded wagon. Kieran rode his horse with Josiah proudly perched before him, while Theodora and Susanna rode in the cart. The morning sun illuminated the landscape, transforming what had seemed threatening in the storm to merely vast and beautiful. "How long have you lived out here, Mr. Blackwood?" Theodora asked as they traveled. "Going on 5 years now," he replied. "Came west after Appomattox, tried ranching first, but the drought of '71 took most of my stock. Now I do odd jobs, some carpentry, guide work when it's needed. It seems a lonely life." He considered this, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It has its moments of peace, though I'll admit the winters can get long." At the wagon, Kieran set to work with remarkable efficiency. He jacked up the damaged side, removed the broken axle, and began crafting a replacement from a sturdy oak timber he'd brought along. Theodora watched his hands, strong and sure as they shaped the wood with an axe and drawknife. "You're quite skilled," she observed, handing him tools as needed. "Had a grandfather who was a wheelwright back in Pennsylvania," he explained. "Spent summers learning his trade. Never thought it'd come in handy out here, but frontier life has a way of using every skill a man possesses." By midday, the new axle was in place, greased and ready. Kieran helped repair the torn canvas and repack their belongings, treating their possessions with care and respect. "That should hold you all the way to Silver Creek," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's about a day's journey from here if the weather holds." "I don't know how to thank you," Theodora said, reaching for her small purse. "Please, let me compensate you for your materials and time." Kieran shook his head. "Keep your money, Mrs. Wade. You'll need it for your fresh start." "Then at least join us for the journey," she offered impulsively. "We could use the protection, and it seems we're heading in the same direction." A spark of something surprise, perhaps, or pleasure lit his eyes. "I'd be honored to escort you if you're certain." And so they traveled together toward Silver Creek, the small caravan moving steadily across the rolling landscape. Kieran rode alongside the wagon, occasionally pointing out landmarks or identifying wildlife for the children's benefit. Josiah bombarded him with questions which he answered with inexhaustible patience. They camped that night beneath a stand of cottonwoods near a small creek. After a supper of rabbit that Kieran had shot and dressed, the children fell asleep quickly in the wagon. Theodora and Kieran sat by the fire, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Blackwood?" Theodora ventured after a comfortable silence. Kieran, please, he corrected. And you may ask, though I reserve the right not to answer. Fair enough, she smiled. I wondered if you left family back east, a wife perhaps, he poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. Was engaged once before the war. Elizabeth Harrington, daughter of my father's business partner, but I came back different and she. Well, she'd married someone else by then, someone who hadn't seen what I had. I'm sorry, Theodora said softly. Kieran shrugged. It was for the best. We were young when we made our promises. War has a way of aging a man beyond his years. Yes, she agreed, thinking of Thomas and how the light had dimmed in his eyes long before consumption claimed him. Life rarely follows the paths we expect. And you, Kieran asked, was your Thomas a good man? The question surprised her with its directness. He was complicated. Kind in his way, but troubled after his service with the Union. The drinking began when Josiah was born. He tried to stop many times, but never could. She hadn't spoken so honestly about Thomas to anyone, not even her cousin in the letters arranging their move west. Something about Kieran invited confidence. Children deserve better than to inherit their father's battles, Kieran said quietly. Yes, they do. Theodora watched the firelight play across his features. You're good with them, have you none of your own? A shadow crossed his face. No. That particular blessing hasn't been mine. The conversation turned to lighter topics, his tales of West Point antics, her stories of teaching school before her marriage. When they finally retired to their separate sleeping places, Theodora found herself reflecting on the unexpected ease between them, a comfort she hadn't felt with anyone since before Thomas fell ill. Morning brought them within sight of Silver Creek, a bustling town nestled in a valley between two ridges. As they approached, Theodora felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. Her cousin Walter had written that they could stay at his ranch until she found her footing, but she'd never met the man or his wife. They were her only living relatives, connected through her mother's side. Your cousin's place is north of town, Kieran said, consulting the letter she'd shown him. We should reach it by midday. Will you come with us? Josiah asked eagerly, now firmly attached to his new hero. I have business in town, Kieran replied, ruffling the boy's hair, but perhaps I'll ride out and check on you folks in a few days if your mother doesn't object. We would welcome the visit, Theodora said, surprised by how much she meant it. The Haskell Ranch was larger than Theodora had expected, with a 2-story house and several outbuildings spread across a cleared valley. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides, and the sound of hammering came from a half-built barn. A tall, broad-shouldered man approached as they drew up to the house. Theodora, he called, his face breaking into a welcoming smile. Walter Haskell, you made good time. Introductions were made all around, with Walter expressing genuine gratitude to Kieran for escorting his cousins safely. Walter's wife, Martha, emerged from the house, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron, her rounded belly evidence of an expected addition to their family. You must be exhausted, Martha said, embracing Theodora warmly. Come inside, all of you. Dinner's nearly ready. Despite their protests, Walter and Martha insisted Kieran stay for the meal. The atmosphere was lively as Walter shared news of the territory and Martha fussed over the children. Theodora observed the easy affection between the couple, feeling both warmed by their welcome and acutely aware of her own loneliness. When it came time for Kieran to depart, he shook Walter's hand firmly and thanked Martha for her hospitality. To the children, he promised to return with a surprise. Then he turned to Theodora. Mrs. Wade, he said, his voice more formal than it had been during their journey. It's been a privilege traveling with you and your fine children. The privilege was ours, Mr. Blackwood, she replied, oddly reluctant to see him go. We are deeply in your debt. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat to the assembled group, and rode toward town without looking back. The next week passed in a blur of settling in. Walter had prepared a small cabin on the property for them, previously used for ranch hands but now comfortably furnished with Martha's touches. The children thrived in the open spaces, following Walter around as he tended to ranch chores and delighting in Martha's patient instruction in the kitchen garden. Theodora found herself with time to breathe, to consider what might come next. Walter had mentioned the town needed a teacher for the coming school year, a prospect that both excited and intimidated her. She'd left her teaching position when she married Thomas, assuming the role of wife and mother would fulfill her completely. 8 days after their arrival, Kieran Blackwood rode up the long drive to the ranch, true to his promise. He carried a wooden train for Josiah and a cloth doll with real hair for Susanna, gifts that sent the children into raptures of delight. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said to Theodora as the children raced off to show their new treasures to Martha. "Not at all," she assured him. "We've been wondering when you might visit." They walked together toward the creek that ran along the property's edge, falling into the easy conversation they'd established during their journey. "Walter offered me a position helping with the new barn," Kieran mentioned casually. "Said he could use someone with carpentry skills." "Will you accept?" Theodora asked, trying to keep her tone neutral despite the flutter of anticipation in her chest. "I'm considering it," he replied, watching a hawk circle overhead. "It would mean staying in one place longer than I'm accustomed to. Perhaps that wouldn't be such a bad thing." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Perhaps not." Kieran did accept the position, moving into the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands. Over the following weeks, he became a fixture in their lives. He joined them for Sunday dinners at the main house, taught Josiah to fish in the creek, and built a small rocking chair sized perfectly for Susanna. Theodora observed the natural way he interacted with her children, never talking down to them or dismissing their questions. It stirred complicated feelings within her gratitude, certainly, but also a growing awareness of him as a man rather than merely their benefactor. One evening in late August, as summer's heat began to soften toward autumn, Theodora sat on the porch of their cabin, shelling peas while the children played nearby. Kieran appeared from the direction of the barn, his shirt damp with honest work, hat in hand. "Evening, Mrs. Wade," he greeted her, the formality they maintained in public still in place despite their growing friendship. "Mr. Blackwood," she returned with a smile, "you've been busy today. The roof beams are all in place. Walter thinks we'll finish before the first snow." He hesitated, then asked, "Might I speak with you privately for a moment?" Curious, Theodora called to Martha, who was hanging laundry nearby, asking if she'd watch the children. Then she followed Kieran a short distance from the cabin to a bench beneath an old oak tree. "I've received a letter," he began without preamble, "from an old comrade in the Montana Territory. He's offering me a partnership in a sawmill operation near Helena." "Oh." The single syllable was all she could manage, her hands suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "It's a good opportunity," Kieran continued. "Steady work, chance to build something lasting." "When would you leave?" she asked, focusing on keeping her voice even. "That's why I wanted to speak with you," he said, turning to face her directly. "I haven't given my answer yet. I wanted to know if you would have any objection to my staying in Silver Creek." Theodora looked up sharply. "Why would my opinion matter in such a decision?" "Because in these past weeks, I've come to care for you, Theodora." The use of her given name sent a shock through her. "For you and your children, more than I expected or perhaps have a right to, Kieran." She began, uncertain what to say. "I'm not proposing," he clarified quickly. "I wouldn't presume so much so soon, but I find myself reluctant to leave without knowing if there might be possibilities here." Theodora's heart hammered in her chest. Since Thomas died, she'd focused solely on survival, on providing for her children. The idea of allowing herself to feel something for another man seemed almost a betrayal. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "The children have grown very attached to you. And you?" he asked quietly. She met his gaze, seeing in it a vulnerability that matched her own. "I enjoy your company greatly, but I have the children to consider above all else." "Of course," he nodded. "I wouldn't expect otherwise." "Perhaps," she ventured, "you might stay until spring, give us all time to better understand what we might want." Relief washed over his features. "I'd like that very much." As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Kieran became an increasingly important part of their lives. He completed the barn with Walter, then turned his skills to other improvements around the ranch. When Theodora accepted the teaching position in town, he built bookshelves for the one-room schoolhouse and repaired its leaking roof. The children blossomed under his attention. Josiah followed him like a shadow whenever possible, absorbing knowledge of horses, tools, and the land. Even Susanna, usually shy with strangers, sought him out to read her stories or admire her latest drawing. For Theodora, watching this bond develop brought both joy and trepidation. She'd seen what grief and war had done to Thomas, how it had transformed a loving husband into a stranger consumed by his demons. Could she trust that Kieran's ghosts were truly at rest? The first snow came in November, earlier than expected, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Theodora stood at her cabin window, watching Kieran help the children build a snowman in the yard. Their laughter carried through the glass, a sound of pure happiness she'd feared might never return after Thomas died. Martha waddled up beside her, her pregnancy now in its final weeks. "He's good for them," she observed, following Theodora's gaze. "For you too, I think." "It's complicated," Theodora sighed. "Love usually is," Martha replied pragmatically, "but Walter says Kieran's a man of his word. Says he's never seen someone work so hard to prove himself worthy of something he hasn't even asked for yet." Theodora felt her cheeks warm. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to those with eyes," Martha teased gently. "The question is, what are you waiting for?" It was a question Theodora asked herself often in the weeks that followed. As Christmas approached, the ranch bustled with preparations. Martha gave birth to a healthy son, named Thomas Walter after both grandfathers, adding to the season's joy. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner at the main house, Kieran walked Theodora and the children back to their cabin through gently falling snow. The children raced ahead, eager to hang their stockings before bed. "I have something for you," Kieran said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "I'd prefer you open it privately." Inside the cabin, after the children were asleep, Theodora unwrapped his gift with trembling fingers. It was a journal bound in soft leather, with her initials stamped in gold on the cover. Inside, the first page bore an inscription in his neat handwriting, "For new beginnings and the courage to embrace them. With deepest admiration, KB." Tears pricked her eyes as she traced the letters. It was thoughtful, personal without being presumptuous, like the man himself. The next morning brought childish delight, as Josiah and Susanna discovered the wooden toys Kieran had crafted for them, a miniature-covered wagon for Josiah complete with tiny horses, and a dollhouse for Susanna with furniture scaled to her cloth doll. When Kieran arrived for Christmas dinner, Theodora presented him with her own gift, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes, and a letter she'd written expressing her gratitude for all he'd done for their family. If she'd stopped short of revealing deeper feelings, it wasn't for lack of them, but rather from caution born of past wounds. Yet watching him with her children that day, she felt something shift within her, a readiness to trust again that had been slowly building since that stormy night when he'd first come to their rescue. Winter deepened, bringing with it the isolation typical of frontier life. School sessions were often canceled due to snow, leaving Theodora with unexpected days at home. During one such storm in late January, Kieran trudged through knee-deep drifts to check on them, bringing supplies from the main house and news that the pass to town was blocked. "Walter says it could be a week before the road clears," he reported, stamping snow from his boots at the door. He sent coffee and flour, and Martha included some of her preserves. "You shouldn't have risked the journey," Theodora admonished, though secretly pleased by his presence. "And leave you wondering," he smiled, the cold having brought high color to his cheeks. "Not likely." He stayed for dinner, then read to the children before their bedtime. As the lamp burned low and the fire crackled in the hearth, they sat together at the small table, a checkerboard between them. "I received another letter from Montana," Kieran mentioned, moving a black piece across the board, Theodora's hand stilled over her red checker. "Oh, they're still interested in having me as a partner." He captured one of her pieces. "They've given me until spring to decide." "I see." She made a strategic move, trying to focus on the game rather than the tightness in her chest. "And have you?" Kieran leaned back in his chair, studying her rather than the board. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I have reason to stay." The directness of his gaze made evasion impossible. Theodora took a deep breath, summoning her courage. "The children would miss you terribly." "Just the children?" he asked softly. "No," she admitted. "Not just the children." He reached across the table, his calloused fingers gently covering hers. "Theodora, I didn't plan this finding you, caring for you all, but it's happened, and I can't imagine returning to the life I had before." "I'm afraid," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas changed after the war. He loved us, but he couldn't find peace. I'm afraid of building something new only to watch it crumble." "I understand fear," Kieran said. "I lived with it for years after Appomattox, wandering, never staying long enough to face what the war had done to me." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I've found something here. I never expected a chance to be the man I wanted to be before the war took that vision away." Tears welled in Theodora's eyes. "The children need stability. They've lost so much already." "I know," he nodded. "That's why I haven't pressed. But I want you to know that if you'll have me, I'm ready to be whatever this family needs, friend, protector, or something more." The storm outside seemed to reflect the tumult within her, hope warring with fear, longing with caution. "I need time," she finally said. "You have it," he assured her, releasing her hand. "I'm not going anywhere until you ask me to." February brought a brief thaw, allowing life to resume its normal rhythms. Theodora returned to teaching, the children to their lessons and play, and Kieran to helping Walter prepare for spring calving. They maintained their friendship, though something deeper simmered beneath the surface, acknowledged but not yet embraced. One crisp Saturday morning, as Theodora hung laundry while the children helped Martha with bread making, Walter approached with an unusual request. "That old McCready place about 2 miles east is up for sale," he mentioned casually. "Kieran's been asking about purchasing it." "Kieran wants to buy land?" Theodora asked, surprised. She'd always thought of him as somewhat rootless, despite his extended stay at the ranch. "Seems so," Walter nodded. "Asked me to look it over with him this afternoon. Thought you might want to come along, give a woman's perspective." The invitation was transparent in its matchmaking, but Theodora found herself agreeing nonetheless. Curiosity, if nothing else, compelled her to see what kind of property had caught Kieran's interest. The McCready place proved to be a modest homestead, a sturdy cabin with a good well, a small barn, and about 40 acres of land bordering a year-round creek. The previous owner had returned east after his wife died, leaving the property untended for nearly a year. "Needs work," Walter observed as they surveyed the overgrown fields. "But the bones are good." Kieran walked the perimeter, his expression thoughtful. "Soil's rich. Could plant wheat here, maybe corn in the bottom land. Room for a kitchen garden too," Theodora found herself adding, imagining rows of vegetables and perhaps a few apple trees along the southern slope. Kieran glanced at her, a smile playing at his lips. "Would you plant one?" If this were your home, the question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Walter, displaying unusual tact, mumbled something about checking the well and wandered off. "Are you truly considering settling here?" Theodora asked when they were alone. "I am," Kieran confirmed. "I've saved enough to buy the land outright and have something left for improvements." "What of Montana, the sawmill?" he shrugged. "It was never about the sawmill specifically, it was about finding purpose, putting down roots." His eyes met hers. "I think I've found where I belong if I'm welcome to stay." Understanding dawned. "This isn't just about buying property." "No," he admitted. "It's about creating a home, one I'd hope to share someday with a family." Theodora's heart raced. "Kieran." "You don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "But I wanted you to see it, to know I'm serious about building a life here, with you and the children if you'll have me." They walked back to where Walter waited, the conversation turning to practical matters of price and necessary repairs. But Theodora's mind remained fixed on Kieran's words, on the future he'd so carefully laid before her like an offering. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat alone by the fire, Thomas's photograph in her hands. She studied his face, younger than she remembered him now, his eyes still bright with hope rather than clouded by pain. "What would you want for them, Thomas?" she whispered to the image. "For me." No answer came, of course, but as she placed the photograph back in its drawer, she felt a curious lightening, as if a permission had been silently granted. March arrived with warming winds and the first green shoots pushing through winter-brown grass. Kieran purchased the McCready place, spending every spare moment making repairs to the cabin and clearing fields for planting. He didn't press Theodora for an answer, but his intentions remained clear in every improvement he made. The second bedroom he added to the cabin, the wildflower seeds he scattered along the path to the door. The children, particularly Josiah, begged to accompany him there whenever possible, returning with excited tales of the fox den near the creek or the wild strawberry patches Kieran had discovered. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and Theodora found herself increasingly curious about the transformation occurring just 2 miles east. One Saturday in early April, with the school term nearing its end and spring firmly established, Kieran invited them for a picnic at his place, as the children now called it. They rode in his newly purchased wagon, the children chattering excitedly while Theodora tried to quiet the nervous flutter in her stomach. The change in the property was remarkable. The cabin gleamed with fresh chinked logs and new glass windows. A porch had been added, wide enough for several chairs, with a swing hanging at one end. The yard was neatly fenced with a gate flanked by young saplings. "Apple trees," Kieran explained, noting her gaze. "They won't bear for a few years, but eventually there'll be enough for pies and cider." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace and sturdy furniture Kieran had either purchased or crafted himself. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with 2 bedrooms extending from the back. A bookshelf held a modest collection of volumes, and a rocking chair sat angled toward the fireplace. "It's lovely," Theodora said honestly, touched by the care evident in every detail. They picnicked by the creek, spreading a blanket beneath the budding trees. The children explored eagerly, collecting stones and spotting early wildflowers. After they'd eaten, Kieran produced a kite he'd made for Josiah, and they spent a joyful hour watching it dance in the spring breeze. As afternoon waned, the children's adventures took them a short distance upstream, still within sight but beyond earshot. Kieran turned to Theodora, his expression suddenly serious. "I've been patient," he began. "Tried to give you the time you needed, but I find myself hoping for an answer soon." Theodora looked at her children playing in the distance, then back to the man beside her, this man who had come into their lives like an answered prayer she hadn't known she'd made. "Ask me properly," she said softly. Surprise, then joy flooded his face. He took her hand, his touch reverent. "Theodora Wade, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife, of allowing me to care for you and your children for all our days?" Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were tears of happiness rather than sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." His kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a demand, but it kindled something within her that had been dormant since before Thomas fell ill. When they parted, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "The children," she said, glancing toward where Josiah and Susanna still played, unaware of the momentous change occurring in their lives. "We should tell them together," Kieran suggested. "If you're ready." They called the children back to the blanket, their small faces curious at the summons. "Josiah, Susanna," Theodora began, "Mr. Blackwood Kieran has asked me a very important question, and I've said yes." "What question, Mama?" Josiah asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. "He's asked if we would come live here with him," she explained. "If I would be his wife and if you would be his family." Josiah's eyes widened. Like a new papa, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Kieran's face. "I know I could never replace your father," he said carefully. "But I would be honored to help care for you, to watch you grow, to be whatever you need me to be." Susanna, who had been listening quietly, climbed into Kieran's lap with the easy trust of childhood. "Will we live in this house?" she asked, pointing to the cabin. "If you like it," Kieran nodded. "We can change anything that doesn't suit you." Josiah looked more hesitant. "But what about Pa? Won't he be sad if we have a new papa?" Theodora felt her heart constrict. "Your father loved you very much, Josiah, more than anything in the world. I believe he would want us to be happy, to be cared for." The boy considered this, his young face solemn with the weight of loyalty. "Can I still keep his picture and the soldier he made me?" "Of course," Kieran assured him. Those are precious gifts that should always be treasured. And you'll stay forever, Josiah pressed. Not go away like Pa did. Kieran met the child's gaze steadily. I will do everything in my power to stay with you for a very long time. That's my solemn promise. After a moment's deliberation, Josiah nodded, apparently satisfied. Then I think it's all right. The relief in Kieran's eyes was profound. He opened his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Josiah stepped into his embrace. With Susanna still in his lap and Josiah against his shoulder, Kieran looked to Theodora, his expression one of perfect contentment. My family, he said softly, as if testing the words. Theodora felt her own heart expand with love for this man who had chosen them, all of them, with such deliberate care. They married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek, with Walter standing as Kieran's best man and Martha as Theodora's matron of honor. The children participated in the ceremony, Josiah carrying the rings and Susanna scattering wildflower petals along the aisle. The reception was held at the Haskell Ranch, with neighbors from miles around attending to wish the new family well. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit in the yard, and someone produced a fiddle. Dancing began, laughter and music filling the air. Kieran led Theodora in a waltz, his hand warm and secure at her waist. Happy Mrs. Blackwood, he murmured close to her ear. Very, she assured him, still adjusting to her new name. Later, as the celebration continued, Theodora found herself sitting on the porch with Josiah, who had grown tired from the excitement. The boy leaned against her, watching the dancers with heavy-lidded eyes. Mama, he said suddenly, I remember something. What's that, sweetheart? When we were stuck in the wagon in the rain before Kieran found us, he yawned widely. You were crying and I was scared. Theodora stroked his hair, remembering that desperate night. I was worried for you and Susanna. Josiah nodded sleepily, but then Kieran came and he said something. He said he'd be our pa even if we weren't his blood. I heard him. Surprised, Theodora tried to recall the conversation. Had Kieran said such a thing that first night? She couldn't remember clearly through the fear and exhaustion. Are you sure, Josiah? That was a long time ago. I'm sure, the boy insisted. He promised even before he knew us good, and now he's keeping his promise. Before she could question him further, Josiah had drifted to sleep against her side. Kieran approached, Susanna already asleep in his arms. I think it's time we took our children home, he said softly, smiling down at Josiah. Kieran, Theodora began, did you say something to Josiah the night you found us, about being a father to them? He looked momentarily surprised, then thoughtful. Not to Josiah directly, no. But I did say something similar to you when you were worried about accepting my help. His expression grew tender. I told you I'd care for them as my own, that blood didn't matter when it came to protecting children. I'll be their dad even if they never share my blood, Theodora quoted softly, the memory suddenly clear, Kieran's voice steady and sure through her tears of exhaustion and fear. Something like that, he acknowledged. I meant it then, though I didn't know yet how much they'd come to mean to me. He shifted Susanna gently in his arms. How much you all would. They said their goodbyes and rode to their new home under a canopy of stars, the children sleeping peacefully despite the movement of the wagon. As they approached the cabin, their cabin now lantern light glowed welcomingly from the windows. Martha had gone ahead to prepare the house for their return, leaving a cold supper and fresh flowers on the table. After settling the children in their new bedroom, Theodora and Kieran stood together in the main room, the reality of their changed circumstances suddenly present between them. Welcome home, Kieran said softly, taking her hands in his. It already feels like home, she admitted. You've made it so? His kiss was different from the one they'd shared by the creek, deeper, filled with promise rather than question. Theodora responded in kind, allowing herself to embrace fully the second chance they'd both been given. Later, in the quiet of their bedroom, Kieran traced the line of her cheek with gentle fingers. I never thought I'd find this again, peace, purpose, love. After the war, I believed those things were behind me. I felt the same after losing Thomas, Theodora confessed. As if joy was something that happened to other people. Yet here we are, he marveled. Here we are, she agreed, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. spring flowed into summer, and the new family settled into the rhythms of their shared life. Kieran worked the land with a dedication born of ownership, planting crops and beginning a small herd of cattle. Theodora finished the school term, then devoted herself to making their house truly a home, with a thriving garden and preserves put up for winter. The children blossomed, secure in the knowledge of being deeply loved. Josiah followed Kieran everywhere, learning the ways of the land and livestock. Susanna developed a talent for drawing that Kieran encouraged, bringing her colored pencils from his occasional trips to town. In late August, as they celebrated Susanna's 4th birthday with a picnic by the creek, Theodora shared news of her own another child would join their family come spring. Kieran's joy was boundless, his care for her during the pregnancy both tender and sometimes amusingly overprotective. "I'm with child not made of glass," she laughingly protested when he insisted on carrying her across a shallow puddle in the yard. "Humor me," he replied, kissing her forehead. "I've never had the privilege of watching my wife grow a new life before." The words "my wife" still sent a pleasant shiver through her, even after months of marriage. This man who had chosen them so deliberately continued to choose them every day, his love expressed in both grand gestures and small moments of consideration. Winter came, bringing the family closer together within the warm confines of their home. Evenings were spent with Kieran reading aloud while Theodora sewed tiny garments, the children listening raptly to tales of adventure or working on their own projects. On Christmas Eve, a year after Kieran had first given her the leather journal, Theodora presented him with a gift of her own, making a quilt piece together from scraps of the children's outgrown clothes, with new fabric representing their growing family. "So we never forget how we came together," she explained as he ran his fingers over the careful stitching. "As if I could forget the most important journey of my life," he replied, drawing her close despite her expanding waistline. Spring arrived just as Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood made her entrance into the world, a robust baby with her father's blue eyes and a cap of dark hair. Kieran held her with reverent wonder, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching her tiny fingers. Absolutely perfect, Josiah and Susanna crowded around, eager to meet their new sister. "She looks like Kieran," Josiah observed critically. "She does," Theodora agreed, watching her husband cradle their daughter. "She has his eyes." "But I don't have his eyes," Josiah said, suddenly uncertain. "Neither does Susanna." Kieran looked up, understanding the unspoken question. "Come here, both of you," he said, making room for them beside him. "Family isn't about looking alike or sharing blood. It's about loving each other, caring for each other, belonging together. Like us." Susanna asked. "Exactly like us," Kieran confirmed. "I promised your mother long ago that I would be your father in every way that matters, and I meant it with all my heart." "I'll be their dad even if they never share my blood," he told Theodora later, after the children were asleep and baby Sarah nursed contentedly at her breast. "I told you that the night we met, and I've never meant anything more." "I know," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "You've proven it every day since." As the years passed, their family continued to grow both in number and in strength of bond. 2 more children joined them, James Kieran and Rebecca Martha, bringing their brood to 5. The farm prospered under Kieran's careful management, expanding to include a small orchard and additional grazing land. Josiah, growing into a thoughtful young man with his mother's gentle spirit and his adoptive father's steadiness, developed a talent for working with horses that promised a bright future. Susanna's artistic abilities flourished, her drawings capturing the beauty of their prairie home with remarkable skill. And if the older children occasionally faced questions about their relationship to Kieran, they answered with the absolute certainty of those who know themselves deeply loved. "He's our father in every way that matters." On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch swing watching their children play in the yard bathed in golden sunset light, Theodora leaned against Kieran's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't ridden past our wagon that night?" she asked. Kieran's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. But then I remember something my grandfather used to say, that the most important journeys often begin when we think we're lost. We were certainly lost, Theodora agreed, in more ways than one. And now we're found, he said simply, kissing the top of her head. As twilight deepened around their home, this home they had built together through love and commitment, Theodora reflected on the strange, beautiful path that had brought them here. From a storm-battered wagon to this moment of perfect contentment, their journey had been one of healing, of second chances embraced. "I love you," she said, the words still fresh after a decade together. "For everything you are, everything you've given us." "And I love you," he replied. "For trusting me with your heart, with your children, with our future." In the distance, a whippoorwill called, its evening song floating across the prairie as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Within their circle of lamplight, surrounded by the family they had forged through choice rather than circumstance, Theodora and Kieran Blackwood held fast to the promise they had made to each other. And to the children, they both claimed as their own a promise of belonging that transcended blood and bound them together in the truest meaning of family.